recently I made a video about the pilot for an Americanized version of Peep Show that was leaked at one point and made its way onto YouTube. It's been up for a few years and is subsequently pretty well known, so a lot of people are aware of how well it turned out. Not very being the conclusion. But today I'm actually rather excited to be talking about something that I doubt anyone watching has ever seen anything of before, that being a second American pilot for Peep Show, this one being from 2008, so 3 years after the last one was made. Yes, there is indeed a second one.
I shit you not.
So firstly, I guess I should clarify a few things about how we know that this was a thing that existed and how I got my hands on it. American TV network Spike TV commissioned a pilot for this American version in 2008, and that was pretty widely reported. You can Google Peep Show Spike TV 2008 and you'll find it being reported on a whole number of different places. This is no secret, and there's even an IMDb page for this pilot. It was made in Chicago and was directed by a guy named Dylan Kidd. Okay, cool. It was produced by Funny Little Man Productions, who I have not been able to find a single trace of online, Pangea Corporation, who are this company that seem to do about 500 different things and have one of the most ridiculous looking websites I've ever seen. Seriously, check it out, it's absurd. And RDF USA, who as far as I can tell own Pangea. As I said, you can find plenty of sources stating that this pilot was in production, but you won't find anything that talks about its release, and so I'm assuming it was always made to be a non-broadcast pilot, resulting in hardly any information about it being online. You won't find the pilot up to watch anywhere, believe me. And so that got me thinking. We know where it was filmed, roughly when it was filmed, and have a partial cast list available. What can I possibly do with that information? And then it hit me. Some of these actors have got to have demo reel footage available, right? I mean, it was commissioned by a major TV network and was a project that was reported on by the media. That doesn't seem like the kind of thing I'd try to hide that I was a part of if I was an actor. So little by little, piece by piece, I began scraping through the acting profiles, resumes and show reels of people that were credited to be in the pilot, and also some that weren't, which takes a lot longer than it had seemed by the way, and involved a hell of a lot of specific search terms. And after all of that, I have managed to piece together over 6 minutes of footage of this 30-minute long pilot. Yeah. Somehow through sheer luck, more than a fifth of this TV pilot was cut up in various chunks in a few different actors' portfolios, and I've trimmed it all down, cut out repetition, and placed all the clips in the order that I think they'd come in, leaving me with the longest amount of footage I'd assume anyone outside of the production has ever had access to, unless it has ever leaked somewhere before, which I'm not aware of happening. And you never know, I don't doubt that there may even be more footage out there somewhere on the internet, but I certainly couldn't find it if there was, and I'm pretty satisfied with what I've managed to accumulate so far. So yes, I have about 6 minutes and 15 seconds of footage from this 2008 pilot at my disposal, which will be made available somehow by the way, don't worry.
Watch me.
And after having made a video analysing Peep Show's pilot script and the 2005 American Peep Show pilot, it only feels right that I try and do the same with this one too. So let's talk about it. The 2008 American Peep Show pilot.
Check out this loser.
So I guess the first thing to note here is that this pilot is actually quite a bit different to the 2005 one, and that it was actually written by Sam Bain and Jesse Armstrong, the creators of Peep Show and the guys that have been a part of every single episode of the show. Now obviously, they would have changed their writing style at least somewhat, considering the entire point here is to try and Americanise an inherently British program, but the fact that it was written by them is a pretty big deal. The fact that they wrote it was widely reported too, by the way, that isn't something that I found. But yeah, that'll probably give you hope that it'll turn out better than the 2005 one did. So before we get into specifics, I guess I should say that obviously I don't have access to the whole pilot and have about 6 minutes and 15 seconds as I've said. Obviously you can't get the full picture of what the story is going to be in this episode, but as the 2005 version was too, this one is basically an amalgamation of ideas from the first few episodes of Peep Show that have been interwoven in with each other. As a result, I've been able to place the scenes I have in the order that they'd logically be in accordance with how the episodes of Peep Show that the events are ripped from play out.
What's happening?
So here is roughly the general outline of this pilot. Mark has some general JLB stuff going on and he gets taunted by Jeff. Mark acquires Sophie's phone number. Mark and Jeremy get invited to a party and while walking there have a flashback to Tony giving Jeremy her husband's porn. Mark and Jez arrive at the party where Mark meets Valerie. Later, Mark and Valerie decide to leave and go to the bowling alley, to which Jeremy also wants to come and invites Tony over the phone. They bowl, and Jeff and Sophie arrive at the bowling alley too, via unrelated events. Later, Mark has pulled Valerie and has some sort of sexual encounter with her. Jeremy pulls Tony, who wants to have loud sex with him to spite her husband, but then said husband shoots a gun in the house, prompting Jeremy to leave. Then they reminisce and have a friendly moment with each other while sat on the roof and looking into the night sky. That's how I've kind of pieced it together anyway. It's interesting because the 2005 pilot was a combination of events from Peep Show's first and second episodes, Warring Factions and The Interview, while this one is clearly mostly using elements from On the Pull, the third episode. Meeting Valerie at a party, going bowling, unexpectedly meeting Sophie and Jeff, and later Mark and Jez both having sex in awkward situations are all events from On the Pull. I don't really have any strong feelings one way or the other as to which episodes are the better choice to cram into the pilot, as I'm a big fan of both The Interview and On the Pull, but I can definitely see why the latter was chosen for another attempt, after a pilot that used elements from The Interview was such a disaster.
Sorry, that's not important.
So I guess the first thing to look at is our two lead roles, as obviously they'll be what decide whether the pilot works well or not. This is Mark, played by a guy named Brad Morris. Appearance-wise, I think he works pretty well. He's just kinda plain looking. Maybe he looks a bit older than Series 1 Mark, but overall I'd say that they're comparatively average looking guys, which are definitely necessary for Mark's role. And you know what? I'd say he works okay in other aspects too. He's not loud and bombastic like the 2005 pilot Mark, and he comes across as cynical and somewhat reserved, just like David Mitchell's Mark.
Oh, bullshit, that didn't happen.
He doesn't look wacky, he dresses in a very Markish, slightly too formal to be smart casual kind of way, and overall, while I'd say I definitely don't dislike him, nothing really stands out about him being especially good either. Just through the circumstances of how I got these clips, I don't have too much Mark footage, but from what I do have, he seems like a completely fine Mark, and comes across like a somewhat natural character. Now, I'd almost certainly place this natural feel on the fact that it was written by Sam Bain and Jesse Armstrong, as they know how to write Mark better than anybody else, and so despite having him be in an American context, they can still capture the general essence of the character. Though in the sitting on the roof scene that ends the episode, I say his Americanization really is apparent, as it's very obviously trying to be overtly buddy-ish, and Mark feels a bit too calm and happy.
Yeah, it was a great night. Can't remember being so satiated.
But overall, not an awful effort for an American Mark from what we can see anyway. He's certainly a lot better than the previous pilot's Mark. Our Jeremy is played by a guy named Robert Chester Smith. Again, appearance-wise, they really hit the nail on the head with him. He straight up does look like what I'd picture an American Jeremy to look like. Same face shape, similar hair, kinda scrawny, a bit more attractive than his opposite lead, but not in a way that he comes across as some jock like the 2005 pilot Jez. You know, his looks just work. At least for me anyway. Some people may see him differently, but I think he does look like an American Jez. Personality-wise, he's not quite as good though. He seems a tad bit more wacky than you'd expect Jeremy to be, but he isn't just straight up annoying to watch like the other pilots Jeremy. Sam and Jesse still manage to maintain the kinda reserved side of the Jeremy role. Yes, he bigs himself up and obviously considers himself to be a cool guy, but with the Jeremy character, there's always that underlying self-doubt and weakness, and that carries over here for me. There are a few bits in which I think the character is a bit over the top, like this scene where they're on the bench together.
Why won't you let me be your friend? Why would I lie?
And he definitely has that almost undeserved bravado that a lot of American comedy characters have. But honestly, these two lead guys really aren't that bad. It did genuinely surprise me, as I went into this expecting the worst, and well, I don't think you could blame me after seeing the other pilot. But yeah, not too bad.
I'm sorry, did you say what?
Something that makes this one stand out from the other pilot is that it's filmed with a POV style that you'd expect from Peep Show, which I think helps it out, as it does feel more like Peep Show and less like generic American sitcom number 2000 with another name tacked onto it. And it also retains the internal voices that you'd expect too. However, I don't think they're done very well here. On a technical level, they don't work too well because the volume of the other audio is turned down way too low and it's incredibly jarring. Like take for example the scene in which Jeremy is dancing at the party.
Point my pelvis to the sky makes you fly.
It's like being in a vacuum or something. It just feels so audibly wrong. By essentially completely cutting out the music that was playing, it doesn't feel like you're still in the same scene anymore. Though I'm not entirely sure if this is actually an error or not, as it doesn't seem like the other background chatter sound effects were lowered at all, as they stick out a lot.
Okay, so there's a new guy in town. Probably just a gay friend.
But yeah, regardless of whether it was intentional or decision or not, it still doesn't work that well. Though I'd say for the most part the internal thoughts do seem to be a lot better in terms of the actual lines that are delivered, like they aren't just simply stating exactly what just happened in the scene like in the 2005 pilot. They aren't perfect, don't get me wrong, but serviceable. Again, it's clear to see that the involvement of Sam and Jesse was vital to this pilot, as the dialogue feeling natural and the characters not doing stupid wacky shit all the time is entirely down to their script. I wish I had access to this script, as it would be really interesting to see the whole picture here rather than an almost random selection of scenes from various points of the episode, and it would have allowed us to see more of the supporting cast who really aren't shown much in these clips. There's 2 clips of Jeff and he's pretty nothingy. There's not enough to judge him by really, but he seems to fall more into the 2005 pilot version of Jeff than the actual Peep Show Jeff, at least looks wise.
Maybe a few fruit-flavored rubbers, you know?
There's Valerie, who's a personal favourite character of mine in the full series of Peep Show, and maybe there's a plot difference here with her in this pilot or something, but she doesn't seem young like she is in the actual On the Pull. In that episode, the fact that she was 17 is a big factor in her relationship with Mark, yet the actress that plays her here looks considerably older and also considerably less gothic, though Mark does comment in a later scene that she was young, so I'm not too sure about her casting really.
How was Valerie?
Young. I took it slow.
Interestingly, the woman that plays her here is someone named Dana DiLorenzo, who is actually a pretty big star now by the looks of it, and had a lead role in the Ash vs. the Evil Dead TV series, so good for her I guess. The same can't be said for anyone else in this pilot though, as aside from her, nobody in it seems to have gone on to do anything major. Tony plays a pretty big role in this episode, as you'd probably expect in one that is mashing together elements from Series 1, and I have to say I actually quite like her. I don't think she's anywhere near as good as Elizabeth Marma's Tony in the actual series obviously, but for an American version she's okay, and certainly worked a lot better than the 2005 pilot Tony, or what was her name, Marsha? The actress that plays her is not listed on the IMDb page, and I can't find any trace of her online, but whoever you are, good job. You really do manage to look proper mental in some scenes, especially the one where she gives Jeremy her husband's porn.
Knock yourself out?
I'll be unconscious in an hour.
As for the obvious people we don't get to see here, Sophie probably stands out the most. She's mentioned in dialogue, in fact in this bit right here where they're talking about Mark getting her number. I'm pretty sure the scene directly before this would have been a flashback to the moment where that happened, given the white frames at the start of the clip that are consistent with how the flashbacks are done with Jeremy getting the porn.
You got Sophie's cell number?
But yeah, we don't get to see Sophie, so who knows what she looked like or how she was played. The IMDb page lists Superhands as being in this pilot. I don't have any clips of that unfortunately, but he was played by this guy, Will Klinger. I would have loved to see how they would have handled an American Superhands, as the previous pilot didn't include him at all, so I don't have anything on which to base an American version. I'd put my money on him being made into a typical stoner type character, personally.
Me too, bro. Me too.
As for comments about specific aspects of the pilot, the fact that this pilot uses flashbacks is pretty interesting, as they were dropped after Peep Show's first series, yet make a return for this Americanized version. To be honest, in the actual series I found the flashbacks to be unnecessary for their actual purpose of telling us things that happened in the past, like that flashback to Mark and Sophie that starts with a shot above them which really served no point at all and didn't really need to exist. The flashbacks in this pilot, at least the ones that we get to see in the full length, are essentially just normal full scenes presented under the guise of a flashback. Like the scene where Tony hands Jez the porn doesn't really need to be a flashback, and the fact that it is one is not used for any artistic reason like we got in the first series of Peep Show, with the weird hazy looking bad thing flashbacks that look visually murky as a means of showing Jeremy's uncertainty around the events that occurred. I wonder why Sam and Jesse wrote the flashbacks in. Maybe they thought an American audience would appreciate them more, or perhaps they regretted ever taking them out of Peep Show in the first place. It's certainly something interesting to think about, but with me only having a single one to look at, it's hard to draw any solid conclusions about how they were going to be used in a more broad sense. For the most part, I don't think any parts of the clips I have are total failures, but there's one sequence that I really do not understand. It's the bit where Jeremy gets scared out of Tony's flat and runs back to his room and starts talking into the mirror.
I love you. I love you. I love you.
Like, am I missing something here? Why does he just start saying I love you repeatedly into the mirror while sounding like he's crying? I get that he's scared, but how does that translate into the I love you bit? Also, the sound mixing in the sequence that leads to him running out of the room is frankly terrible.
Oh yeah, that's a gun cleaning scream.
Oh!
Another part I'm not sure about is the ending. It ends with the sequence in which Mark and Jez sit on the roof looking into the night sky, reminiscing about the events of the day. It's played with this overly warm demeanour that makes it seem like the show is trying to be heartwarming or something. I find it a bit confusing tonally, and I'm not sure if it's even the kind of thing that the two characters would even do in the first place, leaving it feeling a bit strange. I don't know how many people have seen it, but ashamedly, I've seen every episode of the American In-Betweeners reboot, and that show has the same thing going on, where it feels like certain episodes have this forced sense of sentimentality that's both entirely unnecessary and undeserved, but also goes against the tone of the rest of the show. Like, there's a bit in it where the guys in that show have this weird slow motion water fight that is trying to be charming, yet it just sticks out as forced and embarrassing. This ending scene isn't quite at that level of terribleness, but it hits those same notes of forced sentimentality. But again, maybe this is just a sign of cultural differences between British and American comedy.
I think I'm just gonna hang out and have some alone time.
It's hard to draw any real firm conclusions as to how this pilot turned out, seeing as I can't see the full-length episode, but there's definitely a few things that I can say about it. It's certainly better than the 2005 pilot, with the casting and the Bain and Armstrong script being the main things that caused this to be the case. Also, aside from the general quality of the episode, it just feels more like an Americanized version of Peep Show than the other pilot managed to, which I guess you have to give it props for. It's still nowhere near the level of the actual Peep Show, obviously, but judging by the parts of it that I've seen, I'd say it's perfectly okay. It rides that 5 or 6 out of 10 line, you know, watchable, but you wouldn't really go out of your way to watch it. With the huge amount of terrible TV shows that are commissioned every year, I honestly find it pretty surprising that this never got picked up for a whole series. Maybe the rest of the footage has some really terrible stuff in it or something that I just can't see. I wish there was more that I could say about it, but there really isn't, though I hope this video can start some discussions about the pilot, as I find the fact that it even exists to be pretty interesting, regardless of how it turned out.
Life is shit.
But yeah, I hope this was somewhat insightful, and I'll get a link to the footage in the description or in a comment or something, so that more people can get to watch it and give their own thoughts, as I'd definitely be interested to hear them.